You know your husband. You have spent years learning him, the specific weight of his presence, the particular texture of his moods, the difference between the silence that means he is tired and the silence that means something else entirely. You have learned him the way you learn something you have carried close for a very long time. From the inside, without having to think about it, with the particular fluency of a woman who has given her sustained attention to one person across years of ordinary life. And something changed in him. Stop for one moment. Place both hands flat on your legs. Feel the weight of your own stillness. And stay with that sentence. Because if it landed the way I think it landed, if it named something specific, something you have been sitting with and have not been able to fully speak out loud, then you are in exactly the right place. And what comes next is for you. It was not gradual. That is the thing no one around you seems to understand when you try to explain it. The drift that happens in most marriages over time, the slow accumulation of distance, the erosion that comes from years of friction and unresolved things, and the quiet wear of ordinary life, that has a shape you can trace, that has a history. What you are experiencing is different. It has a before and an after. A line in time you can locate, however approximately, before which your husband was himself, and after which something is occupying the space where he used to be. Padre Pio, who spent his entire ministry learning to see the invisible condition of the human soul, called what you are describing spiritual influence. And he said it has 4 specific signs that a wife will almost always notice before anyone else. Before doctors, before friends, before priests, before the husband himself. And he said that almost every time a woman insists she is not imagining what she is observing, she is right. If what you just heard names something you have been living, write it in the comments. You don't have to tell the whole story. One word is enough. Because there are thousands of women watching this right now in the exact same place as you. And knowing you're not alone is the first move God needs to see. Here is what makes this particular wound so difficult to carry. It is not only what is happening with your husband. It is the specific isolation of being the only one who can see it clearly. You have tried to explain it. You have chosen your words carefully, and you have watched the people you were speaking to nod with kindness and offer you the explanations that are available to them. Stress, depression, a midlife shift in priorities, the natural changes that come to a person as they age and the marriage gets longer and the early energy of it settles into something different. And you have nodded back. Because what else do you do when someone loves you and is trying to help and the explanation they are offering does not reach the thing you are describing? The thing you are describing does not have a before and after in the explanations people offer you. Depression develops. Stress accumulates. A man who gradually changes over years leaves a traceable history of the change. What you are watching has a different quality. It is specific. It has a specific texture that is discontinuous with everything that preceded it. A strangeness that arrived rather than developed. A foreignness that is in him and not from him. A quality to his presence that you can only describe as not quite him. And underneath your attempts to explain it to people who cannot see it, there is something that has been consistent across all the weeks and months of this. A knowing. Not a fear, not a suspicion, not an anxiety about what might be wrong. A specific knowing, the kind of knowing that comes from years of the sustained attentiveness you have given to this one person, that what you are watching is a man under the influence of something that is not from him and is not supposed to be in him. Padre Pio was a 20th century Franciscan mystic who bore the wounds of Christ on his hands, feet, and side for more than 50 years. A phenomenon examined and documented by secular physicians and journalists who came specifically to find a rational explanation and who consistently found the wounds inexplicable by any framework available to them. He spent up to 19 hours a day in the confessional during the height of his ministry. His biographers confirm this, noting that he would begin before dawn and continue until long after dark, with very little sleep, across decades of this sustained encounter with the interior of the human soul at its most exposed and most honest. In all of that, across all of those hours, all of those millions of confessional encounters, all of those direct observations of the interior condition of human beings who came to him across every state of spiritual and psychological complexity imaginable, he returned with extraordinary consistency to a specific observation about husbands who had undergone this kind of interior change. He did not call it personality change. He did not call it the natural evolution of a man across the years of his marriage. He called it exactly what it is in the language of the tradition he worked from, a tradition that is 2,000 years old and that has far more developed categories for the invisible life of the human soul than the categories most of us were raised with. He called it spiritual influence, and he gave it 4 specific signs. The first sign is the reversal of the interior compass. Every man, regardless of how expressive he is, regardless of whether he speaks about it, has a set of things he holds as privately, genuinely sacred. Not necessarily in religious terms, though sometimes in religious terms, but in the sense of things he knows to be true and right at the level of his character. His word when he has given it. The specific people whose well-being he guards without having to think about guarding it. The principles he does not bend even when bending them would be easier, because something in him recognizes that they are not bendable without losing something essential. These are the fixed points on his interior compass, the things that orient him, the things that tell him which direction he is facing, the things from which he takes his bearings. Under spiritual influence, the compass reverses, and the reversal is the thing that produces the specific recognition most women describe in this situation. The experience of looking at a man you know with profound specificity and seeing something unfamiliar at the center of him. What he used to hold as non-negotiable he now treats as optional or irrelevant. What he used to protect he begins to expose or undermine. What he used to recognize as genuinely true and good and worth defending, he now dismisses, sometimes with contempt, sometimes with the specific flatness of a person for whom a thing has simply ceased to carry any weight at all. It is not a reasoned reversal. It is not a man who has thought carefully through his values and arrived honestly at a different conclusion through genuine searching. It has none of the texture of honest inquiry. It has the texture of replacement, as though the compass was touched and turned by something other than the man himself, something that had access to the interior mechanism of his orientation that he is not fully aware of. A woman I will call Laura sat down with her spiritual director and told him, before she had said anything else about the situation, before she had given him any context or background. He used to know right from wrong in a specific way, not dramatically, not religiously. He just knew, and something has switched inside him. It is like the part of him that knew, that quiet, specific knowing that was always there has gone quiet, or has been replaced by something that knows differently. Her spiritual director recognized the description before she finished giving it. Not because it matched something theoretical, but because he had sat across from enough women who had observed this specific change in their husbands to know that it had a consistent shape across all of them. The before and after quality, the suddenness of the reversal, the particular strangeness of watching a man's internal compass point in a direction it has never pointed before, not in the years of knowing him, not in any version of him she had ever encountered across all the ordinary and difficult seasons of their marriage together. Laura's husband had not had a visible crisis. No affair had surfaced, no job had been lost, no event had occurred that could account for the change she was observing. What had changed was, in the invisible dimension of his interior, something that had reoriented the part of him that used to know certain things without having to think about knowing them. And she had known it before she had language for it, in the specific way that a woman who has spent years in sustained attention to one person knows things that have not yet been named. The second sign is a contempt that arrived from outside him. This is different from the coldness that develops in a man who has been hurt over time, or the distance that forms in a marriage through accumulated unresolved conflict. Those have histories. The contempt that appears under spiritual influence arrives without the history that would account for it. It appears suddenly or near suddenly, and it is directed specifically and consistently at the things that are most sacred in a man's interior life: his family, his marriage, his faith if he had any trace of it, the people and the realities that represent love and tenderness and the call toward goodness. It targets these things with a specificity that is striking if you watch it closely enough. And it has a quality that is perhaps the hardest to describe and the most important to name. It sounds borrowed. The contempt does not come out of his mouth in his own register. It comes in words that feel like they belong to someone else's vocabulary, someone else's way of framing the world. The specific dismissiveness toward the people he loves, the specific reduction of sacred things to nothing, the particular framework that makes love look naive and tenderness look weak and commitment look like a trap, that framework is not one that grew from inside him. He is speaking from inside a frame that was not his to begin with. And you can hear it because you have spent years learning the specific sound of his actual voice from the inside, and this is not quite it. Padre Pio documented this observation across many confessional encounters. The accounts preserved by his brothers at San Giovanni Rotondo record him noting, repeatedly, that a man under spiritual influence speaks about the sacred things of his life in a register that is foreign to his natural register. The words are his words. The voice is his voice. But the orientation underneath the words belongs to something that is not him. Something that has moved into the part of him that generates language, and is using his voice to say things that his own spirit, given access to itself, would not say. He called this speaking from occupation. He used that language with the precision of a man who had spent 50 years observing the interior condition of human souls and who was not speaking in metaphor. He meant it as a description of a real condition in the invisible life of a person. The mechanism through which a soul generates its speech, its orientation, its way of moving through the world, partially occupied by something that is not the soul itself. This is territory that the medical and psychological frameworks most of us grew up with do not have categories for. And I want to be honest about that rather than pretend the frameworks align when they do not. What Padre Pio was observing and naming is not the same thing as a psychiatric condition, though it can sometimes look similar from the outside. What distinguishes it is the before and after quality that the wife consistently identifies, the specific moment she can locate in time when the language shifted into something she does not fully recognize, when the contempt appeared that had not been there before, when the vocabulary changed in a way that feels like it was imported from somewhere outside of him. She does not require a theological framework to recognize this. She requires only what she already has, the particular attentiveness of a woman who has spent years learning one person from the inside. That attentiveness is precisely what gives her the capacity to notice when the person she loves is speaking from somewhere that is not entirely himself. And that recognition, however uncomfortable, however impossible to explain to people who are not paying the same kind of attention she is the beginning of the prayer that addresses it. The third sign is what changes in the home. Padre Pio taught, and this is perhaps the most unexpected of the four signs, the one most women are most reluctant to mention because they do not expect to be believed when they name it, that spiritual influence on a person changes the atmosphere of the space they inhabit. Not as an emotional impression derived from the general mood of the people in the room, as an actual shift in the invisible quality of the space, something that the occupants of the home, particularly the most sensitive among them, register in a way that does not reduce to explanation by circumstance or mood. Children register it first. Padre Pio observed this consistently across many families where a husband had come under spiritual influence. The children, particularly the youngest children, who have the least formed cognitive filtering of what they experience, begin to behave differently in ways that cannot be traced to any observable change in the household circumstances. They avoid certain rooms or certain proximity to the father in ways they cannot explain when asked. They wake in the night more frequently than they previously did. They ask, sometimes, questions about the spiritual state of the home that are striking in their precision, questions that are not a response to anything they have explicitly observed, that come from somewhere below the observational level of what a child that age should be able to track. Animals register it as well, and Padre Pio noted this without embarrassment. He was a man of the natural world, and he understood that animals operate from a perceptual register that carries less cognitive filtering than the adult human register. A dog that had always been comfortable in a specific space becoming suddenly and consistently uncomfortable in the husband's presence, without any behavioral trigger, without any incident that could account for the change, was, to Padre Pio, a piece of observational data worth taking seriously. The animal was detecting something that it did not have language for, and that the adults in the house had learned to rationalize away. And the wife registers it in the quality of the air in her own home. Women in this situation consistently describe, in language that is strikingly similar across very different communities and cultural contexts, a specific heaviness that does not lift the way ordinary emotional weather lifts. A quality of cold in certain parts of the house that has nothing to do with the temperature and that is not present consistently but arrives in specific ways at specific times. A sense of something being present in the home that is not from the home and not of the people who live in it. Padre Pio's tradition calls this the spiritual atmosphere of a household, a real quality of the invisible dimension of a space, shaped by the interior condition of the people who inhabit it and by whatever invisible presences have been given access to that space through those people. A person who carries something, a bond, a spiritual weight, an influence that has been given access to their interior, carries it into every space they enter. And the space registers the introduction of it in the invisible dimension in ways that the most sensitive occupants of that space pick up before they have language for what they are picking up. I want to say something clearly here before we go further, because the territory we are entering is one where clarity matters more than almost anything else. What I am describing is not a horror story. It is not a framework designed to frighten you or to produce in you a fear that is more disorienting than the one you already have. The Christian tradition, Catholic and Protestant alike, Eastern and Western, across its entire 2,000-year history, has taken spiritual influence on human beings seriously not as something exotic or terrifying, but as a condition of the spiritual life that has a specific, grounded, available response. A response that Padre Pio spent 50 years teaching, refining, and giving to the women who came to him carrying exactly what you are carrying. The presence that enters a home through a husband under influence is not more powerful than the prayer that addresses it. It does not have more authority in the interior of your husband than the God who created that interior. It does not have more claim to the atmosphere of your home than the presence that can be invited deliberately and specifically and consistently into that atmosphere through prayer. The only advantage it has is the element of not being named, the fact that most women in this situation have not been given the language for what they are observing, and therefore cannot aim their prayer at the specific target it needs to reach. This video is giving you the language. And the language is the beginning of the aim. And the aim is the beginning of everything else. The fourth sign is the most important, and also the most confusing. Padre Pio called it the flashes of the real man. A man entirely displaced from himself, A man completely under influence, with no access remaining to his own interior, would produce a consistent picture. Consistent flatness, consistent contempt, consistent atmospheric heaviness. But that is not what most women in this situation experience. What they experience is interrupted. There are moments, sometimes brief, sometimes lasting an hour or an evening, when the man they know surfaces from beneath whatever is holding him and is present in a way that is clearly himself. Not a modified version. Not a version that is trying. The specific man, his specific warmth, his specific way of looking at her, the particular quality of his attention when it is genuinely there, present in a way that is unmistakably real and unmistakably him. And then it goes. He recedes back into the covered territory. The warmth closes over. The flatness or the contempt or the managed distance returns. And the flash, which should have been encouraging, which carried the proof of his continued presence, is frequently more painful than the baseline distance, because it contained the evidence that he is still there, that the man she married is intact inside whatever is holding him. And the evidence of his presence makes the not reaching him more unbearable than the theoretical possibility that he might be gone would be. Padre Pio called these flashes the sign of an unfinished occupation. And he said, with the precision of a man who had seen the interior condition of human souls directly, across more encounters than we can adequately comprehend, that the flashes are the most important thing for a wife to hold. Not as evidence that everything is fine. Not as evidence that the situation will resolve on its own without the specific prayer it requires. But as evidence that the real man is still present, inside the influence, and that the prayer has a real person to reach toward. That there is someone still there to be reached. That the captivity has not consumed him. That what looks like someone else wearing his face is actually him, looking for the opening that the prayer is making. He said, when the real man surfaces, even briefly, even in a single sentence that sounds genuinely like him, even in a single moment of eye contact that holds in the way it used to hold, do not dismiss it as accident or coincidence. Receive it as the man's own spirit, intact beneath the influence, looking for the opening that your prayer is creating. The flash is him reaching toward you from inside the captivity. Your prayer is the hand you extend toward him from the outside. A woman I will call Patricia had been watching the flashes for 9 months before she was given language for what they were. 9 months of a husband who was, in most visible ways, present and functioning, working, interacting with the children, maintaining the structure of ordinary life, but not himself in the specific interior way that she had no framework for. Not him in the way that she had the most specific and developed ability of anyone in his life to recognize. She had watched the flashes across all 9 months with a confusion that was harder to carry than simple grief would have been, because simple grief has a single direction. The grief of the flashes was multidirectional. She grieved the absence, and then he surfaced and she reached toward him, and then he was gone again, and the grief of the disappearance after the surfacing was layered over the grief of the original loss with something that was almost hope turned against itself. She began to wonder, in the hardest weeks, whether the flashes were real, whether the man who surfaced briefly and then receded was truly him, or whether she was constructing him out of what she remembered, applying what she expected to moments of ordinary interaction and calling it recognition. She sat with her priest, finally, and said all of it without editing. The change, the before and after, the compass reversal, the borrowed contempt, the atmosphere of the home, and the flashes, the specific, unmistakable moments of the real man, and the grief of the disappearing. Her priest said, "The flashes are real. They are the most important thing I have heard in what you've described. A man who is simply depressed, or who has simply changed, or who is simply growing distant over time, that man does not produce flashes of his earlier self. The flashes tell you something specific. He is still there. The man you married is inside this condition, intact, and he is reaching toward the surface. What is covering him is not him. And what is covering him can be addressed by prayer aimed precisely at what it is. He gave her specific words for the prayer. Words that Padre Pio had given to women in this exact situation across decades of his ministry. Words that did not ask God to change a man's personality or override his freedom, but words that asked God to exercise the authority that has always been his over the interior of a soul that belongs to him. She prayed for 7 months. And what happened across those 7 months is the story that the prayers at the end of this video are going to make possible for you. But before I give you those prayers, I need to give you the understanding that makes them work. What Padre Pio understood about spiritual influence that most people have never been given is this: it does not operate in territory that belongs to it. It operates in territory it has been given access to. And that single distinction is the foundation of everything that follows. A human soul is not neutral spiritual territory over which any presence can wander freely. A human soul is created and permanently owned by God at the level of its existence, specifically and continuously. The influence that operates in a man under these conditions does not have inherent claim to his interior. It has access because access was given. Access that formed through openings, sometimes through habitual choices that turned the interior gradually away from its source of light, sometimes through exposure to things that created a specific entry point, sometimes through wounds that were never brought to healing and that left the interior vulnerable in the specific location of the wound. But access granted is not ownership transferred. The soul that has given access can have that access revoked. Not by the man's willpower. Willpower operates at the surface, far above the level where the access was granted. Not by his good intentions or his sincere desire to be different. Intentions are above the level where the opening is. But by prayer that is aimed at the specific opening, at the specific level where it exists, asking the one who owns the soul to exercise the authority that was never surrendered, to reclaim the access that was given away, and to restore the interior of the man to its natural orientation toward the light from which it came. Your husband's soul belongs to God. Not to you, to God. Not to whatever has access to it, to God. And that means God has an authority in the interior of your husband that nothing that has been given access can match or compete with. God does not need to fight to be present in the interior of a soul he created. He only needs to be invited to act, specifically, by someone whose prayer is aimed at the right location, offered without the divided attention of fear, and sustained with the particular persistence of a woman who understands that what she is reaching toward is real. You are not praying from weakness. You are praying from the side of the one who made your husband and who never stopped being the owner of the interior of him, regardless of what has been given temporary access to it. That is the ground you stand on. Now Miriam's story. Miriam had been watching the changes in her husband for close to a year when her friend, a woman who had been through something similar 2 years earlier, sat with her and said quietly, "I think I know what this is, and I think I know what to pray." She gave Miriam the framework. Not the framework of the medical explanations she had been offered, not the framework of natural change and accumulated relational distance, but the framework of Padre Pio's understanding of spiritual influence and the specific prayer that addresses it. Miriam listened, and something in her, something below the level of the theological question of whether she fully accepted the framework, said yes. That is what I am looking at. That is what has the right shape for what I am observing. She began to pray the prayer her friend had given her. every morning before the day began, with whatever she had on any given morning, which was not always much. There were mornings of genuine faith and mornings of genuine doubt. There were mornings when the prayer was complete and mornings when it was barely a sentence. There were weeks of sustained praying and a week in the 4th month when she could not bring herself to pray it at all, when the grief was so close to the surface that the act of forming the prayer felt like the act of admitting the situation was as serious as she feared it was, and she could not hold the weight of that admission and the prayer at the same time. She came back to the prayer in the 5th month. And she noticed something that she almost didn't trust herself to notice because she had been wrong before about signs of progress. The quality of the air in the home had shifted. Not dramatically, not consistently, but in a way she could feel. The specific heaviness that had been a constant presence in certain rooms began to lift intermittently, in the evenings, in a way that felt like a window being opened in a space that had been sealed. Brief and partial but real. Something in the invisible dimension of the home was moving. In the 6th month, her husband asked if they could go to church together. He offered no explanation for the request. She gave him none of the emotion she felt at the request. She simply said yes, and they went. And she sat in the pew next to him during that hour and felt, with a completeness she had not felt in a very long time, that she was sitting next to the specific man she had married, present in that particular way that was his way of being present, located in the room and not elsewhere, here with her in a way that was real and not managed. In the 7th month, he told her, in careful and searching language, that he thought he had been lost for a while. He could not explain what he meant by that. He did not have categories for the interior experience he was trying to describe. He said, "I don't know when it started or what it was exactly, but I think I'm coming back. I think I've been somewhere I'm not supposed to be, and I think I'm coming back from it." She did not tell him about the 7 months of prayer. She received what he said with the specific gratitude of someone who knew what it had taken, knew what had done it, and was grateful in a direction that she could not yet fully explain to him. She said, "I'm glad you're coming back. I've been here." The restoration of their marriage from that point was not immediate and was not without difficulty. There was honesty required that was uncomfortable. There was work required in how they spoke to each other and what they were willing to be accountable for. But the captivity was over. The influence had been revoked. And the man who did the work of rebuilding was recognizably him. The specific man with his specific interior compass, with his specific way of knowing what was right and holding it without needing to be asked. The man who had been there all along, inside what was covering him, reaching toward the surface. If you know a woman who needs to hear this right now, who is watching her husband and knows, in the specific way that only a woman who has spent years learning one person can know, that what she is seeing is not fully him, send her this video. Right now, without waiting. Because what Padre Pio understood about this condition does not stop being true just because she hasn't heard it yet. And the prayer she is about to receive could be the thing that changes the entire direction of what she is living. Now the prayers. 2 of them. The first is the prayer of binding and protection, for the daily work of revoking access, of restoring your husband's interior to its natural orientation, of asking God to exercise the authority that is categorically his over the interior of a soul that belongs to him. The second is the prayer for the home, for the spiritual atmosphere of the space your family inhabits, for the displacement of what has been carried into that space through your husband's captivity, for the restoration of the home to its sacred quality. Before the first prayer, ground yourself in a single fact rather than in a feeling. The fact is this: your husband's soul belongs to God, not to the influence, not to whatever has been given access to it, to God at the level of its creation, permanently and completely. What you are about to ask for is not a miracle in the sense of something unprecedented. It is the application of an authority that has never been absent. You are inviting God to act in a territory that has always been His. Stand on that, then breathe. 3 slow, complete breaths, and pray. Lord of every soul and every darkness that encroaches on a soul, I come before you today for my husband, not in desperation and not in fear, but from the position of a woman who understands, however imperfectly, whose territory this is. The territory of my husband's soul is yours. You made it. You have never stopped owning it. You have never stopped being present in the dimension of him that is most interior and most real, even in the time during which something else was given access to him in ways I may not fully understand. I am asking you today to exercise your authority in the interior of my husband, in the dimension of his soul that you created and that you have never relinquished ownership of. Something has been given access to him that should not have access. I do not know the exact shape of the opening, or when it was made, or through what accumulation of things turned in the wrong direction. You have always known, and I am asking you not tentatively, not as someone unsure whether she has the right to ask this, but as someone who understands that this is your territory and that this request is fully within the scope of your authority, to revoke that access. Close the opening. Seal the place of entry. Exercise the ownership that was never surrendered over the interior of this man, and remove from it everything that is not from you. Every influence, every presence, every orientation that is foreign to the man you made when you made him and that is not the truth of who he is beneath what is covering him. Take it out. Leave nothing. And into the space that the removal creates, be there. Fill it with your presence, with the light and the love and the truth that was placed in him when you placed him into existence, and that has not been extinguished by what has had access to him, that has only been covered. Let it be uncovered. Let the compass of his interior return to its natural orientation, toward you, toward goodness, toward the people you gave him to love and who need the specific love that only he can give them. Through the intercession of Padre Pio, who stood at the intersection of the visible and the invisible for more than 50 years, who saw this captivity directly in the interior of the human souls that came to him across all the hours of his ministry, who understood that no influence operating in the territory of a soul has any authority in the presence of the soul's creator choosing to act. I ask for the full restoration of my husband's interior, not partial, not gradual in a way that leaves residue. Full. The full return of the man whose compass was set in the right direction when you made him, and whose direction I am asking you to restore. Amen. After the prayer, sit in the stillness for at least 2 minutes. Do not use those minutes to assess what happened or to look for evidence that the prayer reached its target. Use them to remain in the position of someone who has placed a thing fully and correctly in God's hands. The placement is complete. That is enough for this morning. Receive the having placed it as a completed act, and stay in it for those 2 minutes before you return to the day. The second prayer is the prayer for the home. This is for the evening, for the threshold of the night, when the family has gathered and the house contains all of you and the spiritual atmosphere of the home is the most present reality in the invisible dimension of the space you share. This prayer does not only ask God to be present. It asks God to fill the home in a way that displaces what has settled in it through your husband's captivity. The way light fills a space and leaves no room for darkness to remain, not by fighting the darkness but by being more present than it. Before you pray this prayer, walk through your home, every room, briefly, without ceremony, without anything that would feel strange or dramatic. In each room, as you pass through it, say a single interior sentence, not out loud necessarily, but deliberately. This space belongs to God. This space is sacred. Whatever does not belong here has no claim here. That walk is a prayer before the prayer. It is a concrete, physical act of consecration, the kind of embodied intercession that Padre Pio consistently recommended to women in this situation. He said the body praying alongside the spirit carries the prayer into the physical space in a way that interior prayer alone does not fully reach. The walk through the home is not superstition. It is the body's participation in the reclaiming of the space, a declaration made in the physical dimension of the home's rooms, that this space has an owner whose authority supersedes whatever has been carried into it. Walk through each room. Then gather yourself in the quiet of the evening and pray. Sacred Heart, you who are more present in this home than anything that has found its way into it that does not belong, I am asking you to fill this space tonight. Every room, every corner, every place where something has settled that is not from you and not native to the people who live here. I am asking you to displace it, not with force that creates chaos, but with the quiet and irresistible presence of your light, which nothing that operates in the dark can maintain itself in the presence of, not because of conflict, but because light and darkness cannot occupy the same space and you are the stronger presence. Saturate this home with what you are. Make it a space in which the spiritual influence that has attached itself to my husband cannot breathe fully, cannot settle fully, cannot operate with the authority it has had, because the atmosphere it requires cannot exist in the same space as the atmosphere you provide. Be at the threshold tonight. When my husband enters this home, wherever he has been and whatever he carries when he comes, meet him at the door, not in judgment, in welcome, in the specific welcome of the one who has been waiting for this man to come all the way home since before he knew he had left. And be present in this home in a way that every person in it, especially the children who are sensitive to what they cannot name, who have been registering something they have no framework for, can feel as safety. As the specific quality of safety that comes from a space being genuinely tended, genuinely protected, genuinely occupied by something that is for them and not against them. Through the intercession of Padre Pio, who made the space of his own ministry a space in which the presence of darkness could not fully settle because the light was too consistently and deliberately present. Make this home that kind of space. Tonight, and every night, until the work is complete and what was under influence is fully free and the home contains only what belongs in it. Amen. Then stay in the stillness of the evening. If you have a candle, light it, not as ritual ceremony, simply as the body's act of light-making, the physical dimension of the home participating in the prayer. Let it burn while you are awake. Let it be the visible signal of the invisible tending. Something is present here. Something is keeping watch over what lives in this house tonight. He is in there. That is the thing I need you to hold on to through everything you are carrying. The man, the specific man with his specific interior compass and his specific warmth and his specific way of being in the world, is intact inside whatever has its hold on him. The flashes have shown you this. He surfaces briefly and clearly because he is still there, still reaching from inside the captivity toward the surface, toward you, toward the life that is his and that he has not stopped belonging to. Your prayer is the hand that reaches back. The next video goes into the signs that the influence is beginning to lift, what shifts in the home's atmosphere, what changes in the quality of the flashes, the specific pattern of a man's return as the prayer does its work. That map is the piece this video is building toward. I will meet you there.